border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
Throws deep downfield for the end zone, a lunging catch, and it's a score for the Herd, Jerron Woodyard. And it is 37-0, and Grant Wells is moving up toward a 300-yard passing performance in the first half. That is his 4th touchdown toss.
Story toward Jackson, got separation to the 20, to the 10, and he will go. Lucky Jackson from 54 yards out.
Pressure off the edge. Screen delivers. What a catch, Levias, who brings it in. Armani Levias to the house. Touchdown, Marshall.
This will be from 52 yards. From the far hash mark. John Haggerty, the punter, will hold. Jared Nash will snap it. It's definitely long, and it is unbelievable. The true freshman, Corey Munson, hammers it home from 52 yards.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. It has been a long time since we've been behind the microphones, and honestly, a lot has happened in and around this rivalry. Today, we're going to be focusing on the 2020 season finale episode for Marshall. I've got Trace with me. We're going to try to do the same thing with Steven, later on when we can get schedules to line up. But today it's just kind of like the overall season in review kind of thing. We're going to get some end of the season grades. We're going to get some end of the season superlatives. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff that's in the news here right now. I mean, when I say a lot of news is broken around this rivalry, it really has. I mean, Doc Holliday's no longer the coach of Marshall University. I guess technically he is until the end of June, but he won't be the head coach when the 2021 season rolls around. He probably definitely won't be the coach for signing day here in a couple of weeks if there's any room left on the Marshall roster for some scholarships. So we've got a lot to talk about. And there's nobody better to talk with it than our resident expert, Trace Johnson, who is back with us. It really seems like forever, Trace, since we've been behind the mic. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about. The season did not end well for Marshall. Started out 7-0, ranked in the mid-teens up in the polls, 15, 16, according to which poll you looked at. And then, as bad as you hate to say it, I mean, the freaking wheels came off. And they came off in a bad way. End of the season, 3-game losing streak, lost to the Camellia Bowl, 17-10 to Buffalo. And woof. First time in, program history, Marshall has lost back-to-back bowl games. I mean, it's just not what they do. And, ultimately the goal this season for Marshall was to win a Conference USA championship. They made the trip. They did not win. They lost at home, left a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. And then to go into a bowl game that was essentially, I don't know what you want to call it. It was a winnable game. And to go out and only put 10 points up against Buffalo was just the cherry on top. And ultimately, those two things, with a lot of other stuff throughout the years, led Marshall to decide it was time for a head coaching change. So that's where we are. But before we get into all that, let's talk about some of these end of the season grades. I'll get your end of the season synopsis. I mean, you can start wherever you want to start. If you want to talk a little bit about how it all ended before we get into grades, whatever you want to do. But like I said, ultimately Marshall ends at 7-3 on the season, 4-1 in conference with a loss, 3 consecutive losses to close it out. So not ideal. So that being said, where do you want to start?
Well, I guess I'll just briefly talk about the bowl game. I mean, it's what I said to you just a couple minutes ago before we started recording. I just feel like this bowl game, I wouldn't say nobody, but I feel like really nobody cared about this bowl game. I just feel like this was the most irrelevant bowl game Marshall's probably ever played in. It just felt especially it was on Christmas Day. I mean, people aren't gonna, really be able to invest in that game. And it just didn't seem like it seemed like it was just a lost cause from the start. Like me personally, I know Marshall, has a reputation in bowl games and everything, but I wouldn't have cared if they didn't play in a bowl game at all this year, especially given the whole COVID situation and everything. So it just seemed like it really, didn't need to happen. I I mean, I guess there's people obviously that cared about playing in the game, or else they wouldn't have played in it. But like, it just didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. And the result was it was a big indicator of that. It was very indicative of how it was. It was just flat. I mean, just nothing. Just like the previous two games, they just fell on their face offensively. I mean, can't really ask the defense to do any more than they did this year. I mean, and as we'll get into with the numbers and the grades coming up for the season, I mean, the defense, I mean, could honestly, you can make the argument this was the best defensive performance for an overall year that Marshall's had since 1999 when they were undefeated. I mean, it could very well be that. And like, I think they probably are the best defense Marshall's had since then. And it's just a shame that they didn't get more out of the season. But no, I mean, that bowl game was just, it was what it was. It wasn't anything. I mean, even if they would have won, it wouldn't have been like, oh, well, they just turned around the whole season. No, it wasn't going to be that. So, but as far as the overall season goes, I'll save some more for that later. But yeah, the bowl game was just, I mean, I hate to say irrelevant, but that's kind of what I feel it was.
I feel like that Camellia Bowl trip was just kind of like an opportunity to like, well, let's try to end one on a positive note. Let's not go out on a 3-game losing streak, and they weren't able to do that. Now, granted, there were some big weapons lost going into the game. Devonte Beckett had declared for the NBA draft, the NFL draft. Brenda Knox had declared for the NFL draft, and Josh Ball had all declared for the NFL draft. So 3 huge pieces. But still, even without Devonte Beckett, that Marshall defense played really, really well.
They did.
And even without Brenda Knox, it seemed like Marshall still could have won that game. It just didn't work out that way for whatever reason. But there are some, bright spots in that running back stable. We talked about it all year long. Sheldon Evans, Knowledge McDaniel, particularly, you got to be excited about that guy moving forward. I mean, he is just a bundle of energy running the ball. So it's sad to see Brendan Knox go. Would love to have seen him come back for one more year, but hey, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Reigning CUSA MVP, then turns it around, follows it up with a first-team all-conference performance. He's one of the best backs in the country. I mean, if you feel like it's your time, you're going to strike while the iron's hot, then strike, because you're just an injury away from potentially never being able to play again. So, take it. If you feel like it's your shot, then take it. So we wish him all the best, but still, not having Josh Ball out there, not having Brenda Knox, it did factor into the offensive performance, obviously. But all that aside, I guess Marshall can still hang their hat on the fact that they won the rivalry game. They beat Western Kentucky 38-14. So of all the things that did not go right for Marshall this year, they still can have bragging rights over Western for one more season at least. Let's talk about some end of the year grades, and then we'll do superlatives, because I want to get the details and the analysis from the end of the season before we talk about individual efforts. So what do you got all season long for Grant Wells, the guy that really nobody saw starting, 8 months ago, whatever, how many months ago it was, and then he has the ups and downs that he has, some of the best freshman performances that we've ever seen, some of the worst freshman performances that we've ever seen, really up and down, a tale of 2 seasons, really, the first 2/3 and then the final third, kind of. So what do you got for Grant Wells, considering all that went on this year?
Yeah, I gave him a B for this year. I mean, I almost went with a B+, but I just had to settle for a B just because, like I said, the last 3 games were just rough. I mean, he didn't even play that bad against Buffalo, but the 2 games before that they were rough. So I mean, you can't really ignore those. I mean, that had a lot to do with their drastic fall from grace offensively the last 3 games. But I mean, but in the grand scheme of things, he had a really solid freshman year. I mean, and the numbers and all that back it up. 18 touchdowns and 9 picks. That's a pretty good. I mean, Marshall hasn't had 18 touchdown passes in a season since Chase Litton in 2017, and this was only 10 games. Over 2,000 yards passing, 61% completion, 141.5 quarterback rating. That's the highest quarterback rating in a single season Marshall has had for a quarterback since Rakeem Cato in 2014. Wow. So that's that's a pretty big indicator right there. He was first team all conference, which surprised me, it surprised me when I first saw it, but then I was like, well, not really any other quarterbacks had much this year. So it wasn't that surprising. He was freshman of the year, I think. But the last 3 games, the numbers were just not there. I mean, 39 out of 78 passing, that's 50%, 417 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I mean, that's just not going to get it done. And before that Rice game, he had four interceptions the whole year. And then he had 5 in that Rice game. So, like, that was just, I mean, kind of an anomaly. Even when he didn't play very well in the UAB game or even the Buffalo game, he still didn't throw any interceptions. So, like, that Rice game was just an anomaly. I mean, I just write it off as just having his freshman game. I saw some other stats from him this year in Conference USA ranks. And in pass completions, he's number 3 in the conference. In passing yards per attempt, he was number 2. Pass efficiency, he was number 2. Pass attempts, he was number 3. Total plays, he's number 4. Pass completion percentage, he's number 4. Passing touchdowns, he was number 1. Passing interceptions, he was number 1. Passing yards, he was number 1. So, like, it's kind of crazy, but that he had all those high numbers and stuff. But I mean, it's like people have said, it's kind of a lot to do with the fact that it was a very unorthodox season, and a lot of the quarterbacks, in the conference were kind of just a little bit more unorthodox. Everything was just unorthodox, and like there wasn't really anybody that stood out in the conference as far as single, quarterback play or whatever. So, I mean, and then that's not to take away from Grant Wells, because he had a solid year. I mean, he had the best year Marshall's had at quarterback in a long while. So, I mean, I think he's still the guy moving forward. I don't think anybody should question that. I mean, should there be competition, heading into next season? Sure. But that's for anybody in the country in any position. You can't just, ignore anybody that could come up and challenge you. But, I mean, the last 3 games were bad. It was a bad way to end the year for him. But I think from an overall totality of the season, he more than impressed. And, I mean, I think that's a good sign for the future, because I think he could have a great career. So, and he could have 5 years as a starter. I mean, that's pretty good. Pretty good. So, I mean, I wish it could be a little higher than a B, but I just have to give him a B.
So I want to do something real quick, since the math works out really easy. It's a 10-game schedule. He had 10 games under his belt. You got all those season-long stats in front of you. So divide that down real quick so we can get like a game-to-game. He's good for 20 out of 30 and 150 and 2 and 1 intercept. What does that equal out to? Because I want to see something. If you can do it real quick.
Yeah. Well, the 10 will make it, like you said, make it easy. It's about 200 yards a game, because it's 2,091. So that's like what?
209 a game.
209 a game. 18 touchdowns. That's what?
Basically 1 and almost 2.
Almost 2. 9 interceptions. That's
almost 1.
Basically 1. I mean, that's pretty good stuff. I mean, it's not like it could have been better, and it probably should have been better if he wouldn't have had the fall for the last 3 games. But like, it was still, I mean, that's still pretty solid numbers for a freshman.
Yeah, interceptions wise, the fall off is 1 game. You take away 5 of those, or even if you just take away 4, then you're under 1. You're closer. You're hovering around a half an interception per game instead of almost 1. So you look, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, and half an interception per game will win you a lot of ball games in Conference USA. It will.
Yeah, it will.
I mean, so you're right. There's no need to question that he has absolutely got to be the leader in the clubhouse moving forward. But look, competition brings out the best in everybody. And if you start being comfortable in your position, you let off a little bit. It's just natural. So we don't know. It's something we're going to talk about here later on. We don't know what's going on with Marshall's coaching situation. We don't know who the coach will be. We don't know where they're going to come from, if they're coming from in-house, whatever. So you never can tell if some coach from somewhere is going to bring some gunslinging quarterback along with him for the ride, and all of a sudden you got a new sheriff in town. So, those kind of things are always a possibility, especially when you got to I almost tweeted the other day. This has nothing to do with Grant Wells, by the way, but I was just thinking about it and looking at the overall stats of all these people in the transfer portal. And I was thinking, man, a coach could almost, like Urban Meyer, could start Urban Meyer University, field a football team, and probably build a national championship winning team from the transfer portal. You know what I mean? That's how many people are in the transfer portal. So the possibility to bring somebody in it's always there. So anyway, B is a solid grade for Grant Wells. I think he did a phenomenal job from, the first game. Think about it, all the way back. Yes, it was Eastern Kentucky, but he started his collegiate career on ESPN under the big lights. It was a day game, but, on the big pressure of being on national television, the first game kind of the season kind of deal. Very next week turns around and has a decent game and beats a top 25 Appalachian State team. I mean, they look good. He had a really great game, 75 week, so there's a lot to be excited for. So let's move along as the offense as a whole. What do you got for, Tim Cramsey in year, what was it, 3 or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what do you like? What do you don't like? What's the grade?
Well, definitely a tale of basically 2 halves. I mean, the first 7 games I would have gave him probably closer to an A, and then the last 3 games I would have gave him a flat-out F. So, I mean, it would – I don't know. But for the overall season, though, I give the offense a B-. I mean, they were a tick above what they had been in certain aspects, but the sad part about all that is they were significantly better in all aspects before those last 3 games than they had been the last few years, but unfortunately it ended up pretty much offsetting because of the terrible finish. And I hate, that sucks, but that's just the reality of the situation. Averaged 28.5 points per game. That's tied for 63rd in the country in scoring offense. I mean, out of 127, so another middle of the pack. That's what they've been. That's a shame because they were 37, 38 points a game, would have been probably top 20 or 15, and now they're 63rd. I mean, that sucks. Yeah. 213 yards passing per game, and that's including, everybody that played, not just Grant Wells. 178.4 rush per game. They kind of fell off with the rushing in the last 2 or 3 games because the offensive line was banged up really a lot. And, of course, Brenda Knox didn't play in the bowl game, so you'd expect a drop off there, but they still ran the ball really well, almost 4 or 5 yards as a team carry. You can't expect a whole lot more than that. 391.3 total yards per game. That's tied for 69th total offense out of 127. I mean, more just middle of the pack or slightly below. Disappointing way to finish. Last 3 games, it just ruined the whole season for the offense. I mean, that's just the reality of it. They scored 23 points in the last 3 games. Like, there's no that's as unacceptable as it gets. That people have to be held accountable for that. And they have been. So I mean, you can't have that, especially with how great they were most of the entire year up to that point, being undefeated and ranked 15th in the AP poll. You can't just have a drop off that significant. It just can't happen. Offense, they had to get it done. This was a big year. They had to get it done, especially with how great the defense had been all year. The offense had to get it done when it mattered the most, and they didn't. They lost a championship game, couldn't do anything until the 3rd quarter. Did nothing basically in the bowl game besides 1 drive, which, I mean, there are a few guys out, but I mean, heck, freaking Buffalo had an NFL running back sit out that game, so you can't use that excuse. So, and then, so you just can't, the offense, it has to improve. And that's what we're going to touch on more with the new coaching situation. That has to be addressed primarily over everything else, in my opinion. So offense, it had a really great start to the year. I would have given probably A-, something like that for the first 7 games. But unfortunately, the last 3 games ruined it. So B-.
Okay. I got to go a little bit lower, honestly. This is the last 3 games were the ones that counted the most. Conference championship game and a bowl game counted the absolute most outside of maybe that top 25 game against Appalachian State. And even against Appalachian State, they put up 17. Yeah. So the lowest scoring games of the season were in the ones that mattered the most. And they were, 1 and 3 in those games. So this is a very C average for me. And it's a bummer because they could have done more. I don't want to say that the defensive effort was wasted, but to not come away with a conference title or a bowl win after starting 7-0, kind of wasted that defensive performance. So it's a C for me. But anyway, all right, let's pick it up a notch here. It's defensive time. You talked about all season long how this is the best defense since 2014, best defense since this, since that. How did it iron out when it's all said and done and the dust has settled?
You know what? The first grade I wrote down an A, and then I thought, you know what? Screw this. This is an A+ defensive season. I changed it to A+. And then when I just kept looking at the numbers, and I was like, you know what? There's no doubt about it in my mind. It's A+. I mean, number 1 in the country in scoring defense and number 2 in total defense in the country. Yep. What else do you need to say than that? I mean, that's A+. by anybody's metrics. I mean, 13 points a game allowed. It didn't allow more than 22 in a game. And in the game that they allowed 22, they were on the field for over 41 minutes. Yeah. I mean, what more could you ask from that defense? Only allowed 279.4 total yards a game. Never, like I said, never allowed more than 22 in a game. Only allowed 20 or more twice. I mean, they just absolutely just shut everybody down. I mean, you couldn't have asked for more than that. Devonte Beckett, Defensive Player of the Year in the Conference USA. A lot of guys stepped up and made big plays. A lot of young guys made plays. A lot of guys that we didn't really know what they were going to bring to the table made plays. Eli Neal, Abraham Beauplan, guys like that really are good building blocks around the defense for the future. Whoever the coach ends up being beyond, their cupboard's far from bare. They're going to have a good team coming back. So, I mean, even with a couple of losses here and there. So the defense was just spectacular all year long. I mean, really the only game I could say, one of two, maybe a couple games I could say that they were just, okay, would have been like UAB or Buffalo. But like they had a lot of guys out defensively in that Buffalo game. And then in the UAB game, like I said, they were on the field for, nearly the entire game. So you can't really expect them to do a whole lot more in that situation. So this defensive performance from top to bottom this year was absolutely spectacular. So I got to give them A+.
I wholeheartedly agree. If you were on the fence between this being an A effort and an A+ effort, the fact that you can look and literally go back to the Rice game and go 5 turnovers and you held them to 20 points. Exactly. That's amazing. And one of them was a pick 6.
Yeah.
So what that right there, if that can't earn you a plus on top of your A, then that's pretty amazing. The only thing that would have been more mind-blowing is if somehow Marshall could have turned the ball over 5 times and then won the game. You know what I mean? Yeah. That would have been mind-blowing. But still, this is probably easily the best defense that we've seen since the conference championship of 2014. A lot of folks are going to go back and forth. Is this the best defense that the Doc Holliday era ever produced? And if you say 2014, I can't say you're wrong. If you say 2020, I can't say you're wrong. Right. I mean, it is just unbelievably razor thin, the margin of greatness between these two defenses. So appreciate what we just saw, because it's really rarefied air. I love to use that term, rarefied air. And this is really one of those circumstances. Who knows the next time you'll see a defense like this sustain it for a whole season. Even in a 7-3 season where there was big letdowns, this defense, you could just sit back and enjoy watching. Playmakers at all levels, and so many stars. They played so well collectively. I mean, they really did. This was a team, I'm not a big fan. I'm not going to say I'm a big fan of an interception. I am, because it's a turnover, but I really like the defense that causes fumbles more than those that get interceptions. To me, that's just more exciting, right? Yeah. That's grittier and more hard. I don't know why. I just feel like it's more hard-nosed and more of an attack mentality, because I guess you got to go rip the ball away kind of thing. And that was this Marshall defense's forte. I mean, causing fumbles and recovering fumbles, forte of this defense. So a lot of fun to watch. Definite A+ for me too. I don't know what more you can say. Devonte Beckett, easily one of the all-time greatest to ever put on the Kelly Green. What a story that guy is. I wish him nothing but the best moving forward. I hope he's in the NFL for like 20 years. What a great story. Gosh, all-timer, without a doubt. All right, Trace, special teams. What do you got for the grade for special teams? This was one that you were pounding your fist on early in the season, if you'll remember, but even preseason. Things you wanted to see cleaned up, things that kind of stuck in your craw from the year before. So, what do you got for it? Remember, we had all new specialists, new kicker, holder, long snapper, all new everything. We had some usual suspects on the kick return game and punt return game, but the specialists were different outside of Lefevre. So, what do you got for the special teams?
Yeah, actually, the more I think about it, the grade I wrote down actually is not going to be what I say. It's going to be, I wrote down a B-, but I'm like, that's more like a C+ season. I mean, there really wasn't anything special about it. Not to get punny there, but like there really wasn't anything special about the special teams in 2020. I mean, I looked up special teams efficiency on ESPN. They were 72nd in the country in special teams efficiency, which is way lower than they're used to being. the field goal kicking with Chuchi was okay. Like he made some kicks, but like any kick that was really any kind of distance, he pretty much missed. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe he'll get better with that. And like even in the bowl game, Marshall could have took a lead, 13-10 lead in that game, and then he missed that kick, which I think they should have just gone for it there. But that's beside the point. But I mean, it was okay there. Kickoffs was absolutely atrocious at times. I mean, Lord have mercy. They literally had to put Robert Lefevre, the punter, as the kickoff guy because they couldn't keep him in bounds. That was rough. Kickoff coverage got a lot better. I will say that. It got a lot better, which, to be fair, it didn't have to do much because they were kicked out of bounds half the time. But but no, they did. They were good. They were good. I mean, punting was good. Robert Lefevre, actually, numbers-wise, I'll save some of that for later, but his numbers were the best that they've ever been in certain aspects, or at least the main one. So good stuff there from him. Punt returning, I mean, I was kind of surprised to see Talik Keaton at number one, or the kickoff, the special teams first team punt returner for Conference USA. I was a little surprised to see that again because like he missed several of the games there, and like he really didn't have any that stood out to me. But I guess they said in terms of yards per return, he was number one in Conference USA. So I was like, okay, that's cool. But I mean, first team punt return is pretty cool. But like he certainly didn't have as good of a season as he had in 2019. But he did miss several games and was hurt. So special teams, it was pretty much just average. But I'll give it a C+ just because they did have a first team punt returner. So
yeah, it seemed a very average year, nothing spectacular. I mean, anytime you don't have the big play, you don't have the punt return for a touchdown, the kick return for a touchdown, those fumbles on the kickoff that you pick up and then return for a touchdown defensively. It's kind of hard. Nothing really sticks out to you, but the thing that sticks out first and foremost to me is the continual kickoffs out of bounds. I mean, I don't know how that doesn't get fixed over the course of a season. It's mind-boggling to me. And I'll say it over and over again. I mean, if you're trying to kick it into a corner or, into one side of the end zone, but you continually kick it out of bounds, then maybe it's time to change that approach and kick it down the middle of the field so you minimize your would you rather give the ball to the defense or the return team on the 35 or maybe give up a couple of extra yards on return and get it to the 30? Right? I'll take the 5-yard difference, okay? Keep it in bounds. But yeah, it's very C+ for me too. Coaching effort for the season. Look, this is where we got to talk about some things. Started out gangbusters. Everything looked great. Marshall literally looked like a machine, a well-oiled machine. And then all of a sudden, some of the cogs and the gears started seizing up a little bit, and the machine kind of ground to a halt a little bit. And we've seen Doc Holliday's era come to an end. And whether you agree or disagree, that's where we're at right now with Marshall football. They're in the search for a head coach, and ultimately that always means that there will be several assistant coaches replaced as well. So what do you got for the coaching effort for 2020?
Well, as much like the offense, as good as the start was, the finish was just as bad, or not, if not worse. So I give the coaching a C overall. I mean, it started absolutely great. I mean, they handled the situation of the pandemic and being responsible with it, and they handled all that as well as they possibly could have. I mean, they got a team with all the question marks surrounding the college football landscape and not knowing when you're going to play, not knowing if you're going to have guys out with COVID, all the unknowns and questions, they handled it tremendously well. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They had them dialed in, ready to play. I mean, they kept them focused. They were responsible. Started 7-0 and hit a ranking that they hadn't hit in a long, long time. I mean, they hadn't been 15th or higher in AP poll since 1999. So it had been a long time since they had been that high. But as high as they got, they ended just as low. I mean, literally, like I said, just a complete team debacle at the last 3 games of the year. And I mean, I know there have been a lot of rumors about, possible reasons why that end of the season happened about, there was a fight broke out here and I know probably everybody's heard that by now, and I don't know any of the details on it. Nobody does really, but I mean, whether or not there were locker room issues at that point, I don't know, but you just can't finish that badly, especially when the pressure's on you, especially when if you're Doc Holliday, this is your last guaranteed year with Marshall unless you get a contract extension. You have to finish the year better than that. You can't go 0-3 to end the year. It's just there's no excuse. It can't happen. I mean, and it's like I said in the last podcast we did about their record in November and December games since 2014. Well, now it's 14-14, literally 500 in November and December games over the last 6 seasons. If that doesn't tell you all you need to know, I don't know what does. But I can promise you this: you look at Nick Saban, or you look at Urban Meyer, or Dabo Swinney, or even Bob Pruitt for that matter. If you look at all those coaches, their record's not 500 in November and December games. You can pretty much bank on that. And even Doc's first few years, they were really good in November and December games. They won a lot. They seemed like they always turned. In 2010, for example, they started 1-6, ended up 5-7. They won 4 of the last 5 games. Like, they started turning it around. 2011, they finished winning 5 of their last 7 games and won a bowl game. I mean, they got it going. 2013, they were undefeated in November. I mean, they got it going. But like since 2014, that championship year, it's just not been the case. And that's what separates good teams from great teams. That's what separates championship teams from not championship teams, is you got to be able to finish at the end of the year. And Marshall has not done that. And that's a big, maybe not. I'm sure they didn't say, okay, well, Doc, you're not coming back because you were 14-14 in November, December games. That's not what I'm saying, but that has to stay in the minds of the decision makers and the powers that be. Like, the finish, the poor finishes have to really resonate with the fact that he's just not getting it done, and that probably had something to do with the fact that he didn't come back. He's not back now. The fan base growing very restless and all that, but This was a team that was head and shoulders above the rest in the conference. You can't have a meltdown like that. Like this should have been a team that won the Conference USA championship. My God, they only played 2 road games. Literally, 2 road games. You had all home games basically except 2, and then you won the 2 road games. This is the year. Like, I know it was a tough year with COVID and the pandemic and everything, but Marshall had a lot of freaking things going in their favor this year too. This should have been the year that they won the championship. And the fact that they didn't just sticks with you, and it just really backs up what the decision ended up being about Doc. So, it's rough. It was a terrible way to finish the year. So, got to give them a C.
Overall, I can't say that that's bad, but again, defensively, this was an A effort. These coaches did a phenomenal job getting those guys prepared every week. Even in losses, they still did more than their fair share.
Yeah,
it was never because Marshall was never in a shootout. You know what I mean? To where the offense had to win the game because the defense didn't pick up the slack. It was never one of those. But that's what I'm saying. It was always in tight games because the offense wasn't doing their share and the defense was doing more than they should have had to. Right. So, there was never a scenario where the defense let them down all game long. They played subpar games from time to time according to their own standard, but by and large, this was a defensive effort that was head and shoulders above anything we've seen in a long time at Marshall. And offensively, conversely, it was a little bit different. They started out great and then slowly trickled down a little bit, and it all culminated in 75 week, and then it was just like off a cliff. Yeah. So I don't know what happened there, but there's no one thing that anybody's going to point to and go, well, that is the reason that the Holliday era has ended at Marshall. It's like it's a lot of things, and going 500 in November and December is definitely one of those things. How many years have we seen Marshall in a position to be in control only to give it away?
Yeah,
and that gets tiresome for a fan base. I know it gets tiresome for players who go out there and work their asses off all summer long and 2-a-days and puking in 95-degree weather and all that stuff and lifting logs in the snow and whatever you want to say. But, to be in a position to be in control and then have it slip away, it's no more deflating to anybody else than them, not a fan. So, to be in those positions more than once and have that happen, of course that factors in. It has to factor in. If it doesn't factor in, then what's your criteria? You have to win at the end of the day. So, very average effort. Hard to say, being 7-3, ranked as high as 15-16 in the polls. We were thinking, man, this is a top 10 team. Marshall could crack the top 10. This is going to be pretty amazing. And then no. So overall, what do you got for the Herd this year, 2020? COVID year. Oh, I should say they did a phenomenal job with COVID and keeping the kids focused and, where everybody needed to be. We can't gloss over that. That's not a small thing. We saw so many schools just get eviscerated by positive testing and games getting canceled and postponed and whatever. Marshall was the victim of that more often than not. They weren't ever really the ones that had to cancel a game. They were always getting games canceled on them. So major kudos to the coaching staff for that, for navigating that massive part of this season, because that is phenomenal in its own right. But how about overall? What do you got for everything as we close out season grades?
Overall B. I mean, it unfortunately ended up being just like 2017 onward has been. Just fine. Pretty good. B level. And this should have been an A level team. This was an A level team.
Right. It was an A level team.
It was, and it should have ended up being an A-level team. But unfortunately, you can't ignore just like an epic meltdown at the end of the year. I mean, usually it's one game that ruins it for them. It was 3 games that they lost at the end of this year. I mean, it's just very unfortunate, very deflating as a program, as a fan base. The players deserved more than what they got this year. They deserved way more results than they got. They weren't put in the right situations many times, especially offensively. It just wasn't cutting it, and it's not on the players. Their players, the offense, they have enough players. They've had enough players on offense, enough talent over the last few years to be much, much better than they have been offensively, and that's a sign of something that needs to be changed, and that's hopefully going to be changed in the future moving forward. Players deserve more. The defense deserved more. Brad Lambert and J.C. Price, MVPs of the coaching staff this year. Absolute, just amazing job that they did with that defense. A lot of questions about Tim Cramsey, and they're going to continue to be. I mean, I have a hard time believing he'll be the offensive coordinator, even if whoever the coach ends up being. I have a hard time believing he'll be back, to put it mildly. It's just disappointing because this team has a lot of good players on it, a lot of talent, a lot of players that deserved more than what they got at the end of this year. So overall, I mean, they were still, 7-3, and you won the East Division. That still is, in anybody's book, that would have to be about a B season. But it's just when you look at it, you think, well, it's a pretty good year, but then if you don't really know about the start compared to the finish, then it's just okay. It ended up being a letdown. So, but it was still a B season, even though the last 3 games were extremely disappointing.
Well, what have we been saying for years now? Marshall has got to be better than 8 wins, no title, and a bowl game.
Yes.
And if FIU doesn't come off the schedule, you could extrapolate that to be an easy win for Marshall. FIU didn't win a damn game all year long. So if FIU's on the schedule and Marshall plays them, that puts Marshall at 8-3, no title, and a bowl game. 8 wins, no title, and a bowl game is not going to cut it. And it finally was the straw that 7 wins, no title, and a bowl game was finally the straw that broke the camel's back regarding Doc Holliday as head coach. We've been on record many, many times talking about the positive things that Doc Holliday has done in these last 10, 11 years at Marshall. And some of them are just awesome. He cleaned the program up. He's graduating players. He's preparing guys for life. And in a lot of aspects, that's far more important than wins and losses. But at the end of the day, you're a football coach who's paid to win football games. So if you can you have to be able to do all of those other things and win football games and championships, especially in Huntington, where they want to say we play for championships. Well, you have to do more than just play for them. You have to win them. Stakes are high in Huntington, maybe higher than they should be, I guess, but it doesn't matter. They are what they are, and those fans expect a win. And in a watered-down Conference USA that's ranked worst in the country, strength-wise from top to bottom, in just about any ranking you want to look at, there is no freaking excuse to not – I'm not going to say breeze through this conference every year, but you should be – like I've said it before, the Conference USA title the road should go through Huntington every year. It should. Doc Holliday had a decade head start on a lot of these coaches, and a lot of these programs were just fledgling programs, and they've caught up to Marshall. They've beaten Marshall multiple times at home and away. So
I want to piggyback off of that real quick because
Okay.
I tweeted this a while back. I said, after the news about Doc not getting brought back came out, a lot of fans were like, a lot of people outside of the program were thinking, this is crazy. Look at his record. Look at how much he wins. This is insanity. Marshall's going to, suffer the consequences from this and this and that. And people were like, oh, they just have unrealistic expectations. What unrealistic expectations? They want to win a terrible conference more than once. Like, how is that unrealistic? I mean, this conference is dog crap. Like, I hate to say it, but this conference is terrible.
Well, let me ask you a question before you go off on a rant. What is a reasonable expectation then? If your expectation isn't to win a title, what the hell is your expectation supposed to be?
What is your expectation? Just to have a winning record? Who cares if that doesn't? Okay, here's the thing. Yes, everybody will acknowledge that Conference USA in 2020 is not what it was in 2010, but it was a much tougher conference his first 3 or 4 years in the league until they realigned. But from 2013 or 14, since then, its conference has been bad. It's been this year, it was flat out the worst in the conference. Sun Belt was much farther ahead. That was, it usually was only maybe the MAC or maybe the Sun Belt you could say were worse than Conference USA. Both of those conferences were better this year. I mean, I just, and if you've been there 11 years and you've been coaching in this Conference USA realigned, watered down crap since let's just say 2014 onwards, that's what, 7 seasons? Yeah, that's 6 or 7 seasons. You should have 3 or 4 titles with the amount of talent that Marshall has. They have as much or more talent than anybody in Conference USA every single year, and they have one championship. I mean, I don't care what program it is. It's not this is the thing too. It's not like Vanderbilt firing their coach and saying, oh, well, we expect to win the SEC. That's unrealistic.
Yeah.
So, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as a bad Power 5 team firing a coach because they can't win their conference. Their conference has titans in it. Their conference has roadblocks that you can't get around. Well, who are the roadblocks in Conference USA? Conference USA doesn't have any roadblocks. Marshall should be the roadblock that nobody can get around. I don't care how it sounds. This is not the same thing. This isn't even the same thing if Marshall was in the American. Marshall wouldn't fire their coach for winning 7 or 8 games a year in the American. They wouldn't, but this is Conference USA. This is a bad conference in football. This is the reality, and that just wasn't going to cut it. So what else can you say than that? I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing when we go back to talking about expectations and folks saying, "Well, what are they expecting at Marshall?" Well, let me ask you: do you think they shouldn't aspire to be Boise State or UCF or even Memphis or App State? I mean, of course they should, because those teams are constantly winning 9, 10, 11 games a year. They're constantly in the mix or going to the conference title game in their conference. And let us not forget, Marshall was all those schools before they were. Yeah. That was Marshall in the late 90s, early 2000s when they were running their MAC run for fresh in the FBS. That was them. They were winning 10, 11, 12 games a year, always in the MAC title game, winning conference championships, going to bowl games, winning those. That was the recipe. So that's why expectations are high and should remain high in Huntington, because they've been there before and they know they can do it again. So it's just time. I mean, it's just time for a change. It's a breath of fresh air. Could things go wrong? Yes. Could things also go really right? Yeah. So what do you got to lose? I said this before in a previous podcast. Winning 8 games in a season, year in and year out, is not, to me, better than hiring a new coach, winning 6 games for 2 or 3 years, and then winning 11, 12 games after that. Just sacrifice the 2 wins. You still get to go to a nobody cares about it bowl game. Yeah. And then you start turning on the juice and you're winning 10, 11 games. That's how you got to do it, I guess. All right, so let's talk about end of the season superlatives. MVPs for the team, the bright spots. Enough about the negativity. Out with the bad air, in with the good air, right? Let's talk about your offensive MVP for the season.
Yeah, this one I kind of had to think about a lot more than I initially thought I would, because there's a few guys that were like pretty important to the offense this year, and I honestly almost just said the offensive line, but I just decided to single out one guy. I went with Brenda Knox again. I mean, I feel like Brenda Knox had another great year. I mean, almost 900 yards, almost 5 yards a carry in 10 games. That's just Brenda Knox stuff, about 9 or 10 touchdowns on the year. I mean, that's just what you expect out of him. And he would have easily had 1,000 yards if his line wasn't as banged up as it was against Rice and UAB, and if he would have played in the bowl game. But, I mean, it was just another great year for Brenda Knox. I kind of thought about Grant Wells, and I thought, no, I can't give it to him after the last 3 games. And then, the receivers, the receivers had a much better year this year. Corey Gamage really emerged. Xavier Gaines had a really good year, but I just couldn't quite go there either. So the one that I just think just naturally would fit into that role, that award, is Brenda Knox. I mean, another really good year for him. I mean, he is what he is. He's a guy that could hopefully get a chance to play on Sundays. He's entering the NFL draft. Hopefully he gets a chance. He's done absolute wonders for Marshall program over the years. One of the best, in my opinion, one of the 5 best running backs in program history. I mean, just a great player. So he's my offensive MVP.
Yeah, he's my offensive MVP for Marshall as well. And, you talked about 900 yards, whatever, could have easily eclipsed 1,000. But, I mean, he basically disappeared from the Marshall game plan. The final Well, I can't say the final 3 games because he didn't play in the bowl game. But for the final 2 games of the year, especially in that Conference USA title game, that game had all the makings of it being a Spencer Brown versus Brenda Knox, just like head-to-head game to see who for running back supremacy, and Marshall decided to go in a different route.
Yep.
Marshall decided to pass on first down all the time, and it didn't work. So I feel like he was vastly underutilized, and it's not really a small coincidence that Marshall went off the rails. He showed how important he was at the beginning of the year, the first 7 games of the year, how integral he is to the offense, not as a runner, but also a pass catcher and a blocker. And then for whatever reason, maybe they knew that he was going to declare and they didn't want to, see him get hurt right at the very end. Who knows? I'm not trying to give anybody an out or let anybody off the hook, but whatever the reason was, he wasn't heavily involved the final 2 games that he played for Marshall against Rice and against UAB. So, but he is my offensive MVP. I'm with you. I think that as a group, as a collective group, a position group, the wide receivers definitely took a big step ahead of where they were a year ago. But nobody really is that dominating wide receiver right now. So Grant Wells made a strong play for me as well, but just not being able to hold in a semblance of his play when it counted the most kind of took him out of the running for me. Brenda Knox was just consistent. I mean, he was just consistently great. Consistently, you could count on him. Hard yards, moving the chains, long runs, whatever. He's your MVP. He proved it again. Defensive MVP, who you got? This might be the biggest slam dunk. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest slam dunk in the history of postseason superlatives, but who you got?
It's Devonte Beckett and everybody else. That's really what it is. I mean, it's hard to be that way with a defense that had so much greatness this year, but he was the guy. I mean, he was the guy. One of the best linebackers that I've seen come through Marshall ever. Easily one of the best they've ever had. I mean, just an absolute workhorse. I mean, he was it's almost hard to believe that he was as great as he was because it just looked easy for him almost. He just always was involved with every play seemingly. He's just always in the picture with this, putting his hat on somebody. He's always around the ball. I mean, just an absolute beast. That's the best word to describe Devonte Beckett. He was a beast. Absolutely deserved Defensive Player of the Year in the Conference USA. So, needless to say, if he's the conference MVP or defensive MVP, he's going to be the Marshall defensive MVP. It's pretty obvious to think it, and I think he'll have a very, very good shot in the NFL. A lot of people say he might be a little undersized, but whatever he lacks in size, he makes up for with heart, passion, speed. The guy will make plays in the NFL if he gets the opportunity. So, Devonte Beckett like a slam dunk from half court defensive MVP for Marshall this year.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's Devonte Beckett for me as well, and that's not to say that other guys didn't have absolutely phenomenal years. Darius Hodge had a great year. Najee Johnson had a great year.
Yeah.
There were some guys that came out of nowhere that, Marshall fans had to kind of see, well, what do we actually got here? Guys like you said, Bo Plan, Eli Neal, Jamari Edwards was my preseason pick along the defensive line to break out. I think he did that and showed that he could be a real force for the future at Marshall. Kobe Cumberlander had another good year. I mean, defensively, a lot of guys stepped up in a big way, and they just developed and elevated their games, but none did it to the level that Devonte Beckett did. 90 tackles on the season. I mean, if the Herd plays a full complement of games, he cruises past 100 tackles.
Yeah.
He's just got NFL written all over him. And, I don't like to compare players to other players, but he reminds me a lot about a friend of the show, DJ Hunter. We had him on not too long ago, but DJ and Devonte look a lot alike as far as their style of play and what they do well. And I remember when DJ was coming out, I compared him to, a player from yesteryear. It was a hybrid type player in the NFL, and that was Cam Chancellor for the Seahawks. And I feel like Devonte Beckett might have to play that same kind of safety hybrid linebacker role. But, if he's in the right situation, he can stick. He can stick in the NFL. So, Devonte Beckett, MVP, defensive MVP. Special teams MVP, Trace. Who's the guy?
Well, this was a weird one just based on the fact that the special teams really didn't have anybody that I consider were that great of a, standout year. But I went with Robert Lefebvre. I think this is probably the second or third straight year I have gone with Robert Lefebvre. But this year, I especially have more grounds to say it because he had, as far as his yards per punt, this was the best he's ever had at Marshall. It's gone up every year since 2 years ago. But this year, he was 42.5 yards per punt. Really had to use him a lot more in the last few games than they would have liked. And I mean, you got to think about he had a lot to do with the fact the defense was able to hold teams in check at the end of the year when the offense wasn't doing anything because he was pinning them deep pretty good amount of times. So Robert Lefebvre really helped with that. And not to mention, he was almost a savior when it came to kickoffs because they had to insert him in as a kickoff guy because they couldn't keep him in bounds. So, that was big. That was very big in its own right. So Robert Lefebvre kind of had to play double duty there a little bit, kind of like Corey Vedvik had to do all three things a few years ago. Well, he had to do two things, and he did them both well. So I got to give nothing but respect and props to Robert Lefebvre this year. So he's my special teams MVP.
Hey, shocker. He was my special teams MVP as well, and it's not by accident. He, like you said, all the numbers improved. He did a great job punting, and the thing that put it over the top for me was something like I said earlier. There was no big play, no touchdown play special teams-wise this year, but the fact that he did have to come in and mid-game to come out starting a second half and do kickoff duty, to keep balls from sailing out of bounds was huge. Marshall had to have that, and he was like, all right, put that on my back. I'll do that. And, he came up big in a number of different spots. And you're right as rain by saying, he helped the defense out by pinning offenses deep. Some of these games could have been a little bit uglier for Marshall. The Rice game when, nothing was going right offensively for the Herd could have gotten a little bit more out of hand, but thanks to Lefebvre and that defense, it didn't. So Robert Lefebvre is the number one choice for special teams MVP for me as well. All right, here's where it gets interesting because, folks, we haven't talked about – Trace and I did not talk about these. We did not compare lists, so it's – we're 3 for 3 going in. But here's where it gets where it can go awry. This is where our thought processes may or may not deviate from one another, and I'm interested to see what he says, and I'm sure he wants to know what I say. This is the breakout player, and I'm going to tell you right now I picked 2. I picked one for offense and one for defense. I don't know if you did or whatever, but I did. So who are your breakout player or players for this season?
Yeah, I only picked one, but, I mean, there's a lot of guys that had breakout years. I mean, like defensively especially, a lot of guys had breakout years. So it could have been a number of people, but I went with Grant Wells. I mean, a year ago at this time, well, I don't know if at this point if Isaiah Green had transferred yet, but about a year ago this time, you had no idea what Marshall was going to do at quarterback. Or 8, 9, 10 months ago, you had no clue. And then, hearing about Grant Wells, seeing that he was the only other guy on the roster really at quarterback, and like you just didn't know what he was going to do. Like you didn't know if he had it in him to, be the starting quarterback right now. And he went out there and played very well for most of the year. The last 3 games, they are what they are. They were bad. He didn't live up to what he had done the rest of the year, but you can't ignore the overall numbers. And he had a very good overall season, really, for a freshman coming in a COVID year. There's a lot that he had a lot of pressure he had on his shoulders, and he handled it very well more times than not. First team all conference quarterback. Marshall hasn't had a first team all conference quarterback since Rakeem Cato. That was surprising. You could make the argument, and the numbers kind of back it up, but that was the best individual season for a quarterback that Marshall's had since Cato in 2014. Quarterback rating wise, it was the best since then. So, if you want to look at it like that, that's going back a ways. So, I think he's going to be a very good player in the future. Could be, one of those all-time greats if he just keeps it together. If, things work out, if he sticks with the course and, stays on, whatever, then he'll be in good shape to really leave a very lasting impression in Huntington. So I'm going to say Grant Wells is my breakout player just because, for obvious reasons. You had never seen the kid play. You didn't know anything about him. So he certainly broke out when it mattered, but for the most part. But
yeah. No, huge breakout season. I did not go with Grant Wells because I just felt like that was so obvious. We didn't know anything about him. He was on the roster, but he wasn't on anybody's radar for being quarterback. Let's be honest. No, you can lie and say, "Oh, I knew that was going to happen." You didn't know. Nobody knew. Give me a break. So the kid came out of nowhere essentially and became a first-team all-conference quarterback in year 1. That's pretty breakout. It doesn't get any more defined breakout than that, but still not my pick. My pick was defensively linebacker Eli Neal. What a guy. Came out of really nowhere, 2-star recruit coming in, and then as the season just kept going on and on, there he was in more and more plays, bigger and bigger role in the defense. Got to love what that guy's going to be doing for the next couple of years in Huntington if he decides to stay. Now, I'm not saying that there's rumors out there that he might leave, but I'm just saying you never know what's going to happen.
No.
I hope he stays because I think he's a star. He is an absolute star. And my offensive breakout player, believe it or not, is a guy who's been getting a lot of pub the past couple of years, but he took it to another notch this year. And that's offensive lineman Kane Madden. Named All-American by PFF and second-team All-American by Walter Camp. That's not a small feat, okay? No. To be recognized as an All-American, period, is one thing. But to do it at a G5 school is something else in its own right. And to do it on the offensive line is a whole third different monster altogether. So Kane Madden is by far my breakout player on the offense. What a weapon. That dude is. Started out as a walk-on and is now an All-American. What can you not like about that story? So, man, 2 big weapons I hope to see in Kelly Green next season and beyond. But, wow, congratulations to him, by the way, for being named All-American by 2 different outlets. All right, Trace, play of the year. What do you got for your play of the year for the Herd?
Yeah, I pondered this one for a little bit, but then I kind of just went with the play that just stood out the most to me that I think was by far the most memorable play of the year. And just 2 simple words, peanut punch. Play of the year. That's
play of the year.
That's what it is. That's the play that's the most, defined with Marshall in 2020. I feel like that's the play everybody's going to remember that essentially won them the game against App State. Of course, everybody remembers the situation. I'm sure it was 17-7. Appalachian State went for it on 4th down and short, faked it to the running back, threw it up over top. Tight end was running wide open, looked like he was going to stroll right in the end zone. Brandon Drayton caught up to him, punched it right out, and Marshall, got the ball in the end zone. The offense was able to run out a lot at the time, and they ended up winning the game. That play won them the game against App State, a very good team. Even though App State had 3 losses, they still won 9 games. They still won a bowl, and the 3 losses they had were all games they could have won against. Marshall was a really good team for most of the year, and then, of course, Coastal Carolina was a great team, and then, of course, Louisiana was a great team. So Appalachian State, they were still App. App was still App. It's just they weren't quite – they just didn't go undefeated, but they were still pretty much like they always are. They were a top 25 team at the time they played Marshall, and that peanut punch from Brandon Drayton ended up helping Marshall win that game. So that was Doc's first ever win against a top 25 team. So it was a big, big moment, a huge win, great moment for Marshall. So, and that was really what cemented it. So that's my player of the year.
Yeah, it is the play of the year. For 2020, that's what people should remember the most as far as one individual play. And you say, man, Marshall ended up with the ball in the end zone. No. It wasn't just Marshall ended up with the ball. It was this crazily odd, wild bounce that landed right in the arms of Najee Johnson right before he fell out of bounds. Yeah. I mean, it couldn't have happened more crazily. I can't even think of a proper adjective. That's how wild it was. It was meant to be for the Herd in that play, because that ball could have easily skipped out of bounds. It could have easily, whatever. And it landed right in the arms of Najee Johnson as he stepped out of bounds. So that is the play for sure. I didn't really have to go back and forth. I didn't even have to think about, could it be this? No, it was that. It was that play without a doubt. That's what started Marshall on the trajectory into the top 25. So that's what that singular play was the catalyst for the quick rise through the polls for Marshall. And they dropped it. They broke in and then dropped back out and then broke back in, but still that single play was what did it. So that is absolutely the play of the year. How about the best team performance for the Herd in 2020?
It was the App State game. That's what I went with. I mean, it's pretty obvious that was the highlight of the year. I mean, they won the East Division, but they kind of backed into the East Division. They won it and they deserved it, but they didn't actually win a game that clinched it. They kind of just won it because they didn't play.
By default and tiebreaker.
By default and by tiebreaker because FAU couldn't finish the job. It couldn't keep any pressure on them. But the App State game, they had to go out and win that one. I mean, Appalachian State was very good team. They always are. Had a great team again, had a quarterback at that point in time, had only lost 3 games in his college career. That's just a winning program. And for Marshall to knock them off in impressive fashion, 17-7 was a great team win. In my opinion, that's the single best. Well, let me see if I might have to choose my words with this, but I think for an overall single game defensive performance, that's the best I've seen out of the Doc Holliday era. That was the best I'd seen. I mean, there had been other certain moments and certain aspects where I remember in 2018 when they completely shut down Devin Singletary and held him 39 yards. That was extremely impressive. But as an overall defense from top to bottom against a very potent offense, that was probably the best I've seen in the Doc Holliday era. I mean, to only give up 7 points to that team, it's hard to do. And I said after that, there's no way App State will score 7 points or, under 10 or 7 points in another game all year, and they didn't. I mean, they scored points on everybody. I mean, that's a very impressive, extremely impressive defensive performance. Offense, wasn't great, but they were definitely good enough to win the game. Brenda Knox had a big game. Grant Wells made plays when it mattered. The big long pass to Xavier Gaines that led the zone read where Grant Wells kept it around the end zone, gave him a 10-point lead. That was the margin of victory. So it was just a great moment, especially knocking off a top 25 team. They were ranked 23rd at that point. App State was. So that's by far my best team performance of the year.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the things that went on in that game as well. We talked about, if you'll remember, Stephen Gilmore had a real grow-up moment there.
Yes,
He'd been picked on a lot and then turns around and gets an interception as App is headed towards the end zone. Huge play. You talk about Xavier Gaines and the big gain down the middle. It's a beautiful pass, beautiful catch. Left us with that image of him smiling at his own replay on the scoreboard, and that was cool. I mean, there was just a lot of cool things that happened in that game. The peanut punch, of course. App State doesn't run for 100 yards in the game, which is mind-boggling. And then they went on to obliterate everybody on the ground basically for the remainder of the season. Leading into and following that game, they ran all over basically everybody.
Yeah,
including in the bowl game in North Texas. I think their running back Cameron Peoples set a rushing record in the bowl game or something like that. So this team was stout, but believe it or not, Trace, this is not my performance of the year. Performance of the year to me goes to the 50th anniversary of 75-week Middle Tennessee State, a 42-14 dominating win over a Middle Tennessee team that, while was bad, had Marshall's number for the last 2 seasons. And let's just talk about some of the things that happened in that game. Grant Wells, best performance of the season, in my opinion, 336 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks.
Yeah.
Brenda Knox ends up with 70 yards rushing, one of those numbers that always pops up. As a whole, the Herd ran for 184 yards as a team. I mean, defensively, the defense ends up with 3 fumble recoveries. You had several guys, Najee Johnson, Devonte Beckett, both over 10 tackles each. I mean, it was pretty good stuff. 5 total tackles for loss, only 1 sack on the day, which was kind of astonishing. But overall, as a team, just dominating win. That's the performance of the year. And when you take into account that it's 75 week, that it was the 50th anniversary of the plane crash, all that culminated in absolutely, positively, without a doubt, 100% to me, the team performance of 2020. It just was.
So let's talk about some. I gave that one some serious thought, though.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's easy to go to App State and get in a top 25 win at home and all that kind of cool stuff, but that one just meant a little bit more. I would have traded a top 25 loss for a dominating performance, and we just happened to get both that in this season. Yeah. So whatever. How about some? Let's talk about some different stuff now. The 2020 season's over. Accolades are done. There's only a few things remaining on the calendar per se. Actually, I guess you could say the calendar is flipped for Marshall. This is the 2021 season, both literally and figuratively, because you got a new coach that's got to be hired, a staff that's got to be put in place. You got signing day coming up in February, and then you're looking at spring ball. So let's talk about some of the things that surround that. We talked about some players that have declared for the draft, some big pieces already. Knox, Josh Ball, Devonte Beckett, all declared for the NFL draft. You've got this cloud of who will return for that extra year of eligibility granted by the NCAA. I haven't heard one way or another if some of these seniors that were very important parts of this Herd team will be or won't be returning. Guys like Xavier Gaines, Najee Johnson. I mean, some of those offensive linemen, will they be returning? Millette, Omer. I mean, who knows, right? Yeah. It's very hush-hush right now. Not a lot of guys are putting anything out there. I haven't heard anybody really declaring for the transfer portal. So I guess if there's no smoke, there's really no fire. So all you can say right now is until you hear something, you just got to assume that everybody's coming or not. I mean, well, I don't know, because you're a senior. Does that mean you're coming back or you're done? So, what do you think, Trace? What are we looking at here? What does your gut tell you? Do you feel like some of these guys are waiting to make their decision until a new coach is hired, or do you think some of these guys are just like, nah, I'm kind of done? What do you think?
Well, it's certainly trickier now than it was a month ago, because considering, you didn't know Doc's future, but now you know that he's not coming back. So now it's a little harder to say, well, I bet they're all coming back now, because you just don't know that. But I mean, I do think it's pretty telling that they only recognized 4 seniors on Senior Day. I thought that was pretty telling when they first did that. I mean, they had obviously a lot more than 4 seniors on the team, so that's basically suggesting that they might come back. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just depends. I mean, I feel like most of the players that were seniors that didn't get recognized on Senior Day probably will come back. I feel like a lot of them will, but the coaching situation, it's completely up in the air right now. I mean, of course, they haven't hired anybody. A lot of rumors going on about that. So I think that hire will be a big factor as to who comes back as well.
Yeah, I got the feeling like some of these guys are going to want to see who they may be playing for and who may be retained and who may be replaced as far as assistant coaches go. And a lot of that would be like, hey, if Greg Adkins is retained as the Herd offensive line coach, well, you might see some of those guys decide to come back for another year, right? And try to improve that draft stock, try to get – but, you look at somebody like Tim Cramsey, for example. If you bring in a more conservative type offensive coordinator who really not going to light the scoreboard up, well, maybe you see a guy like Xavier Gaines decide, I think I'll either hit the portal or won't come back. I don't know. So I tend to think that we're going to have to see some decisions get made on the coaching staff before some of these guys start putting out there whether they're coming back or transferring or, going to be moving on. But I don't know. It's very much up in the air. One thing I've got to talk about, though, we did see one Marshall coach already leave from the staff. That's right. Strength and conditioning coach Luke Day was hired away by South Carolina to be the head strength and conditioning coach down there for the Gamecocks. And I really liked Luke Day. I thought he did a great job. I tweeted yesterday that the guys always looked in shape and had plenty of motor for 4+ quarters. And, that's a big aspect to take into account. A strength and conditioning coach is a vastly underappreciated hire by a lot of by a lot of football fans in general. But, during certain courses of spring and summer, coaches can't be really in too much contact with these guys other than the strength and conditioning coach. So he's got to be a solid guy. I mean, Scott Sinclair was the absolute best Marshall has had in a long time, and he's just making a king's ransom down there in Georgia for Kirby Smart on that staff. But Luke Day was right up there. He did a great job, and it sucks to see him go. Wish him all the best. I know he'll do a great job down in South Carolina, but, that's one that's already on the radar for Marshall, and that's one that you can't just sit around and, take your sweet time finding somebody to hire, because guys still got to get in the weight room. Spring ball will be coming up really soon. The conditioning programs will be hitting really quick. So you got to have somebody, you got to make the right choice to lead that program, and somebody that can continue to get Marshall all the motor and all the juice that they need for 4+ quarters, week in and week out. And we'll see where they go with that. So now the big thing we've got to talk about, Trace, is obviously the Herd head coaching situation. We know that now for a fact that the Doc Holliday era has come to an end. There has been some speculation of how that came to be and who was involved in that or whatever. And that's all a conversation for another day. I don't want to get into any of that. All I want to talk about is what we really know. And all we really know is that Doc Holliday will no longer be the head coach at Marshall for the 2021 season and beyond. So that means there is a vacancy right now. And again, there's a lot of speculation of who the coach will be and, candidates and this, that, and the other. So what I want to do right now is let's just take a little bit of time and let's talk about some of the, candidates that you've heard tossed around. Let's talk about some of the guys, maybe a top 5 list that you might have of guys that you think are legitimate candidates, guys that you would like to see potentially get this job at Marshall. And maybe we'll toss around a dark horse candidate. So, you can toss about as many names as you want, guys you would really like to see get the job, guys on your personal top 5 list, names, whatever, people that you absolutely think they should be calling to be told no, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about this Herd head coaching search. Where are you at with it? What do you want to see this go around? We know what we had with Doc Holliday. I think he was a good guy to hire at the time. The program needed straightened up a little bit, and we've talked about that a lot. He did that. He started bringing in a higher level of athlete from top to bottom. Marshall has always had good athletes and good recruits and diamonds in the rough, guys like Vinnie Curry and stuff like that, 2-star recruit coming in. But Doc took some guys from areas that Marshall hadn't recruited as strongly, and he brought a lot of team speed and, was able to get him a championship and has fielded some all-timers for the Herd. So what do you want to see with this Herd hire, Trace? Right off the bat, what do you want to see? What do you want to see the 2021 and beyond Marshall Thundering Herd look like? What do you want to see as a fan when you go to the game?
I want to see points. I mean, that's what I want to see. I want to see points, and that's what has to happen at this point in time. I mean, I was watching, I think it was the playoff game with Alabama and Notre Dame, and they were talking about, Nick Saban quotes and everything, and even Nick Saban, who's probably as old school as it can be, says now you can't just win with a great defense. You have to have an electric, high motor offense. You have to have an offense that can put up points to win in today's landscape of college football. And Marshall has struggled with that the last few years. They have not been able to keep up with teams. They've had pretty great defenses over the last 2 years. The defenses have been more than adequate enough for Marshall to win a conference championship, but the offense has not been keeping up with their end of the bargain. They haven't done it. This year started out, or 2020 started out so good, but then they completely fell off the face of the earth the last 3 games. You just can't have that. That's primarily what this entire fan base wants and needs out of this new head coach is someone that will shake things up, someone that's going to be flashy, that's going to have an offensive mind, that's not going to be, old school 1980s style football. It needs to be somebody that's up with the times currently, that will shake things up, that will give everybody that needs it a swift kick in the pants. That's what, as a program, as a hire, they need somebody that can go out there and just turn the whole offense around. And I think that they could do that. They have more than enough athletes and talent on that offense to get it done. And especially once this new coach starts getting recruits in to, fit what offense he wants to run, they just need something flashy. I don't know how else to say it. It has to start with that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Look, that's the way it is. That's how you get out there now. You have to put up points. You have to be exciting. If you want to make national waves, you want to be on, all the sports highlight shows and get your brand showcased more often, that's the way you got to do it. You do it with big time, exciting plays. If you can put up 50 and 60 points a game, you got to do that. And there were times this year that Marshall could have put up 50 points a game and they didn't do it. Right. You can't do that. You just have to obliterate an opponent if you can do that. So I think Marshall should go after somebody that's got a little bit of, I'm sorry, let me try that again. It's a lot of B sounds. Marshall should go after somebody that's got a little bit of bravado, a little bit of attitude, a little bit of, I don't give a crap. If it's there for me to run it up on you, I'm going to, because there are teams that Marshall plays. If they could run it up on the herd, they will. They will. So you have to, there's no room for conscience anymore. Come on, man. If you want somebody to not score 60 on you, then you have to field a defense that can keep them out of the end zone, right? That's the way it is. And
my thing about the whole offensive minded thing isn't even about just running the score up. I'm talking they just need a team that's exciting to watch offensively. You just need the excitement value, like Marshall had from 2012 to 2014 offensively. They need something like that. They need an offense that can just give the work to whoever they want to do it and whoever they play. They need that. They need something flashy like that, because that will excite the fan base. That'll make fans want to show up to see the games. You win now with offense. That's my opinion. You win in 2020 and 2021 college football with offense. There's no coincidence that the two teams playing for the national championship right now are probably two of the 3 or 4 best offenses in college football. There's no coincidence there.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean now that if you field a strong offense, you can't field a decent defense, because Alabama's pretty stout on defense as well. Yeah. But look, what we're talking about here is this. We know Marshall's already got a strong foundation now and moving forward defensively. Yes. Right? And there are teams in the FCS level that put up points and yards and bunches, and they win a lot of games. And if those players exist, they can exist in Huntington too. Go find the coaches, man. Go get the guys that will go down and find you the best. Look, these I hate this term, you know that. But these skill players, wide receivers and the guys, quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, all this stuff, they want to be in an exciting offense that's going to score points. That's going to get them juiced up and be high energy. They don't want to be run, pass, run, pass, punt. That's not what it is. That's not. No. So if you're not going to go hire somebody that's going to bring excitement to the fan base, to the team, to the program, put the conference not necessarily on notice, but make them have to perk up a little bit. Like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to change the way we, game plan for Marshall, because we got some new problems now. Then what are you doing? What are you doing? Why would you even want to hire a coach to where not every fan, but the majority of the fans are going to be like, really? That's the best we can do? Really? Come on, man. So that being said, who do you got? Who's your top 5 choices that you would like to see get this job. No particular order, just 5 guys that you would like to see patrolling the sidelines for the Herd based on what we know. Now, let me put the disclaimer out there. We've heard Chad Pennington come out and say, I'm not a candidate right now. I don't, that's so okay. And I'm sure Byron Leftwich is at the top of your list, but he's not going to say anything. And look, man, I can't see the guy leaving Tampa. I mean, he's coaching Tom Brady. You want to see him coach Tom Brady, come down, coach Grant Wells? No offense, Grant Wells, but you're not Tom Brady. And he's in the NFL playoffs. I mean, they just won yesterday, so they're definitely going to go on to the next round of the playoffs. He's not going to talk about it. He's focused on his job, which is winning a Super Bowl. So that said, who do you got? Who's the guy, 5 guys on your list that you would not necessarily mind or would like to see on the sidelines for the Herd?
Well, excluding Brad Lambert because he's already on staff, I'm just going to focus on guys that aren't on staff. Now, I mean, you could say Brad Lambert's you could say he's maybe the number 1 potential guy that they could replace him with. And, I have my own opinions on that. But, I mean, I think the guy's a great defensive mind. I think he's a very, very smart football mind, really good coach. But is he the guy that Marshall needs as his head coach? I'm not sure about, because I feel like it would just be a lot of the same. It'd be like Doc 2.0 in a lot of ways. And I feel like Marshall needs to move away from that era of old school football. They need to move into 2021. And that's what I believe. And it wouldn't, I mean, just think about it. Would anybody in the fan base be genuinely excited if they hired Brad Lambert as head coach? Because I know he's a great.
I'm sure some would.
Maybe some.
There are.
If you want to keep him as defensive coordinator, that'd be great. Keep him as DC because he's great. He's a great defensive coordinator, and he's a great defensive mind, and he's done absolute wonders for the defense. But I know personally I wouldn't be excited about it. It would just be like, okay, they're just trying to keep a guy that's close to the program, that knows the ins and outs of the recent era of the program. They're just trying to keep that going, which they don't, in my opinion, that doesn't need to happen. But, okay, on to my list. I'm going to go and move on to that. I just had to touch on the Brad Lambert situation. I mean, would it be bad if they hired him? No, I wouldn't call it bad, but would it be exciting or different or new? No, it wouldn't be. So that's kind of where I am.
Before you get into that, here's the thing. If Marshall, in fact, hires Brad Lambert, here's what I think will happen throughout Conference USA. Everybody's going to go, what? That? I mean, no offense to Brad Lambert. No offense to anybody else. It's just saying, they're going to go, you hired the fired Charlotte coach to run your program? Yes. Wow. That's what I feel like especially Charlotte fans, they're going to be like, really? You really? Yeah. So I don't look for anybody to respect that hire. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's not going to I don't think that would initially strike fear into any opposing fan or team's psyche. They'd be like, wow, there's a lot of, okay. But anyway,
right.
Who's your list?
Alrighty, so these are just 5 that I wrote down. There's a lot of other guys that have been talked about, rumored as that guys that have applied for the job, but they've interviewed, hit this and that. A lot of names out there. But these are just the 5 I wrote down, and I feel like these 5 would be very, very positive hires for the program, and the fans would be excited about it. I wrote down Sean Lewis from Kent State. I feel like everybody's heard that recently. The guy's very young head coach. He's up to date with, the times now. Kent State was a very good offense. He's really got an offense going there. Got them a bowl win last year in 2019, which never happens for Kent State. He had them going good this year. The only reason they didn't get to the MAC title game this year, I think, is just because they didn't play enough games or something like that. So they really had a good year this year. He's really got him going. He's I think 34 years old. That's a really young head coach in college football. That's a guy that you could have immediate success with, I feel like. And he's got an offensive mind, young, energetic coach, So I feel like that would be a good option right there. A lot of the old school fans might say, oh, well, he's not been around enough. He's this, that. And a lot of people would look at the fact that Kent State doesn't field very good defenses, but Kent State doesn't have the athletes defensively that Marshall has. I can tell you that much. So I'm not worried about that. But, I think that would be a good hire. Personally, I would like it. But, it might cause a little bit of controversy with some of the fan base. I don't know. But that's one of the guys I wrote down. Other guy I wrote down was Adam Fuller. And I think all Herd fans should pretty much be familiar with him. he really picked up the slack defensively after Chuck Heater left. He was a great defensive coordinator for Marshall. He's been a great DC at other places. He was at Memphis. He's at Florida State now. I mean, the guy's been around. I think he's a very good coach. I'd be excited. He can recruit. He's done really good for that for Marshall in the past. And I mean, Florida State, Memphis. I mean, the guy's really good coach, and I think that could be a pretty exciting hire. That's one thing that I was thinking during this whole talk about the search and everything is Doc's had so many great assistants over the years that any of those guys could fill in the head coaching position, in my opinion, and people would be happy with it because he's had that many great assistants. And Adam Fuller's right up there. So I wrote down Adam Fuller. I wrote down Mike Fury or Fury. I don't know how to pronounce it. Fury. Okay. I wrote down Mike Fury because, I mean, he was a guy that he's in the NFL right now. Great coach. Did a lot of great things for Marshall. A lot of talk about his name being thrown out there. He's no stranger to the program. He knows about the history and the tradition and what Marshall, what they play for and everything. And, so all that kind of stuff. He knows about the 75. I think he would honor the whole Marshall history and, the right way. I think he would handle it all really well. He's, another energetic coach. I think he'd really pump some life into it. So I'd like to see that possibly. I mean, if they hired him, I don't think he's going to leave probably from the NFL. I think he's with the Bears right now or something like that. So, I mean, I wouldn't expect that, but like, that's a guy I would call for sure. Then I also wrote down Jawan Sider, and I know we're both pretty high on this guy. I think that honestly, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but in my opinion, he's the single biggest reason for the rise that Marshall had from 2013 to 2015 because all those players were his recruits, essentially. He's an extremely good recruiter. I mean, he can recruit the best of them. I mean, look what he's done at so many different places. WVU, I mean, he was a great recruiter there. He's at Penn State now, recruiting players at Penn State. I mean, the guy's top-notch recruiter. Now, it would be a pretty big jump from being a running backs coach to a head coach, but I feel like this is a guy that would be perfect for it. He can recruit. He's young. He's just – I think he's got the makeup to be a great head coach at some point. And, starting out at a Conference USA school would be a pretty good start. I mean, if he has success, 2 or 3 years at Conference USA, has big success, I mean, a bigger teams could look at him. I mean, it could be one of those situations. I feel like he's going to be a head coach at some point. I just don't know when. I would really like to see him on the Marshall staff, though. I can tell you that. Whether he's the head coach or whether he's just another, he's not going to leave from Penn State to be an assistant at Marshall, but I would like to see him on the Marshall staff, and I think he would be a very good head coach. And then there's Byron Leftwich. I mean, that's months ago I said he is the single best hire Marshall could make. And I stand by that. I don't care if it's Bear Bryant's reincarnated self. I don't care if it's Vince Lombardi's reincarnated self. Byron Leftwich is the best hire Marshall could make, in my opinion. I mean, it writes itself. I mean, he's Mount Rushmore Marshall player of all time. He's an excellent NFL coach, offensive coordinator right now. He's maybe the best leader Marshall football's ever had for a player. I mean, he can recruit. He can relate to the players. I mean, it literally writes itself. I mean, I think it's going to happen? No. But does that make me want to stop thinking about it? No, it does not. I don't care if it's unrealistic or not. I mean, here's the thing. They would have to pay him definitely more than Doc made. I mean, even as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, he's still probably making $1 million and a half a year. I mean, Marshall would have to get it to the $1 million mark, and Doc wasn't even making $800K, I don't think. He was right around there, a little under $800K. So they would have to really open up the pocketbook if they wanted to even have a shot at it. But, I mean, we know how grateful and thankful and, appreciative he is of Marshall and how much he loves Marshall. But, like, he's probably in line to get an NFL head coaching job in the next couple years. So it's going to be hard to expect that. But, like, I just think that's the most exciting hire they could do, the best hire they could do. He's an offensive mind. He's young. I mean, all those things I listed off. I mean, there's not one thing you could say negative about hiring Byron Leftwich, in my opinion, that I could think of. There's not one bad thing about it. There you go.
Other than the fact that it's not bad. The only negative is that it's the most unlikely to happen. But
yeah,
I know, and I say this, and I think Byron Leftwich would be the absolute answer. But I said this to you and trying to put it in perspective. Like, you don't leave a job that 32 people in the world have for a job that 130 people have. That, let's be honest, isn't as prestigious as some of the Power 5 coordinator jobs. Marshall's head coaching job is not as prestigious as, say, Brett Venables' job, a defensive coordinator at Clemson. I mean, he's making a ton of money to coach defense only at Clemson. So there's no way a guy like that's going to leave that job to come be the head coach at Marshall and take a 50% pay cut. I mean, it is what it is. You have to be a little bit realistic. So there's no way that Byron Leftwich is going to leave being OC of an NFL team with the potential of being a head coach in the NFL, which is the highest level of football, that another 32 people only have that job. You don't do that. The Marshall job honestly will always be there for Byron. If he wants it at some point with any given 3 to 5 year period, most likely, there's going to be an opening at Marshall, and his name will always come up there. So he's 40, 41 years old right now. At 50, 55, they would still hire him in a heartbeat. Still. So look, there's some names I've just jotted down on my list, and some of them, all of them, I don't think I would mind seeing. Now, do I think they're necessarily the best candidates out there, or do whatever you want to call it? Whatever. But I think the first guy you have to call and you have to make him tell you no is Tom Herman. I mean, whether you can afford him or not, he's one of the hottest coaches out. I mean, the former University of Texas head coach, outstanding offensive coordinator at Ohio State. I mean, come on, man. You have to call the guy and be like, do you want to coach our team? And he has to go, no. All right, box checked. But what if he says yes? What if he says yes? Just think of the players that he's recruited over the years in Columbus and in and around that area of Ohio and the upper East and down in Texas. Think of some of the guys that he could bring along with him. You know what I mean? I mean, this is a year that you could get away with doing that in a really big way and have an extra year of eligibility for a lot of these guys. So I think you have to just make them tell you no. And let me talk about one thing you mentioned before when you talk about Mike Fury, and you said, well, I think the guy knows what Marshall's all about, and he knows the story of the 75 and this, that. Look, man, any coach that's a decent coach that you hire is going to know that story and respect that story and showcase that story. So to me, that's not a selling point. That you don't need somebody that knows that, because anybody that is worth a crap that's going to be a head coach at Marshall University is going to embrace that story for every bit that it's worth, right? And you're going to showcase that, because that's a big part of what Marshall is. So to me, that's not a selling point for hiring a coach. I think they would all do that. But anyway, Tom Herman is definitely a guy you got to call and make tell you no. I mean, he's unemployed. Yeah, he's got a big buyout coming, but that's only offset, I believe, by what a new school would pay him. So, hey, if he's due $15 million and Marshall hires him for $1 million, he's still due $14 million. You know what I mean? And it keeps him in the game. He doesn't sit out for a year, and he goes and, it's a little bit of an image rebuilder, and maybe you only have the guy for a year and he bounces. So what? If he turns you around in 1 year and gets you a conference championship, and you can attach a big buyout to that contract and use that to hire your very next coach, that's like the ideal situation, right? Number 2 for me is a guy that, well, not necessarily number 2, but number 2 on my list is a guy that was a former assistant at Marshall. He's been in a number of places, Penn State as well, like Cedar. It's the current offensive coordinator at West Virginia, and that's Gerard Parker. Grew up in Louisa, Kentucky, right on the shadows of Huntington. He's really familiar with the area. So played his football at UK and has been a really successful coach. Coaches a pretty good offense down there in Morgantown. I know a lot of folks right off the bat will just turn their nose up at anything WVU related, and, for whatever reason, okay. But I don't think that's any reason to turn your nose up at a quality candidate. Like, you're going to not hire Nick Saban because you're not going to hire Nick Saban at Auburn because he coached at Alabama. Come on, get real. So I know that, Herd fans don't necessarily like WVU anything, but if he's the best candidate out there and you can get him, then you hire him, right? The aforementioned Dewan Cedar, I think he would be a pretty good choice as well. Former coach at Marshall under Doc Holliday, running back coach, recruiting coordinator at Marshall. He's from Belglade, Florida. Marshall has been really good at getting a lot of players from South Florida area, including Belglade High School, where a Marshall alum is the head coach there and was just named Coach of the Year. Rashad Jackson, former defensive back, is the head coach at Belglade. And Jawan Cedar has been a coach, like you said, at Penn State, currently a running backs coach. He also had a stint with the Gators. So right back down there recruiting in Florida. He's been at West Virginia University, and he's been at Marshall. Big stud player down there as well in his high school days. I mean, he's a legend down there in Belglade, in the muck, they call it. So I think that would be a good, solid addition. Is he ready to be a head coach? I don't know. But, he knows the program. He can recruit the hell out of some players. It's a guy that can fill your roster up with players. So if you're a head coach and you hire a crazy, awesome, innovative OC, you've just filled the room up with athletes to execute all those plays. So number 4, Sean Lewis, you mentioned him, Kent State head coach, young guy, offensive-minded, high energy. I think he would be an excellent hire. Kent State's got him under contract. It's only like he makes under $450K. So Marshall could bump that salary up quite a bit and get a lot of bang for their buck, I think. You can tell Kent State, so he's probably very adept at recruiting Ohio, which is, an area that Marshall tries to hit pretty hard, and being able to put some things on film for recruits from other parts of the country to say, hey, this is what we're going to do in Huntington. I think that would excite the fan base. Maybe not initially, because a lot of fans probably are like, who's that? Who's Sean Lewis? Why are we hiring a Kent State coach? What is that? I mean, let me pump the brakes on that for a second, and let me give you a name of a guy that a lot of people are drooling over right now for a head coach, and that's a guy by the name of Matt Campbell. Okay, Iowa State head coach. Where'd he come from, Trace? Do you remember where he got hired from? I do.
Let me
Toledo.
Guess. Toledo, that's right.
Yeah, he came from Toledo, folks, and now he has Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game, right? So, yeah, sometimes Matt coaches work out pretty well. So just because that's right. So just as it's no reason to turn your nose up saying, Kent State, whatever, man. He's obviously not any good if he's only coaching at Kent State. Well, he's 34. Where do you want him to be coaching? He's 34 years old. Good gracious. I think he should be at the top of a lot of folks' lists, honestly. He should be a really strong candidate, fits in the budget really well, checks a lot of the boxes, and, I think he could win Marshall a lot of ball games. And number 5, a name I've heard tossed around a lot that has fallen under the radar for a lot of people over the years because he changed schools, and he's another former WVU guy, and that's defensive coordinator Tony Gibson. Remember Tony Gibson from yesteryear under Rich Rod and a couple of guys? Yeah, he coached a really good Dana Holgerson,
Yeah.
Coached a really aggressive type defense there in Morgantown, and he's now the defensive coordinator at NC State. It's a name I've heard tossed around. I don't think it would be the worst choice, really. Would it be my top choice? Probably not. But I think it would be a solid hire because, he's a player's coach. And I remember the separation between he and WVU wasn't that amicable, and a lot of players didn't want him to go. So he's a player's coach. I think his guy would definitely bring a different type of energy to Marshall, and we know what they've got on the defensive side of the ball already. So, that's 5 guys that's very WVU heavy influence with Tony Gibson, Gerard Parker, and Jawan Cedar. But look, man, take what's out there. If these guys are excited and they fit into your budget and they've got the philosophy that you want, I mean, who are you to turn your nose up at them just because they patrolled the sidelines for, in blue and gold for a little while? Doc Holliday did, and you kept him for a decade plus. So what's the point? To me, in my opinion, I think this is the time that Marshall needs to hire the young coach rather than, I hate this term too, but because it sounds so derogatory, but a retread. You don't want to, the coach that's had a bunch of different jobs and he's on his way down, and, we'll give him a job because he's got a name or whatever. So go young, go innovative, go exciting, go high energy, somebody the players can relate to and strike a little bit of lightning into the fan base and put some points up on the board. So it's all about. How about a dark horse candidate, Trace? A name you've heard floating around that may or may not be in legitimate contention, a guy that you do want to see or don't want to see. Just give me that candidate's name and explain why or why not.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of names floating around. I mean, of course there is. It's always kind of fun to keep up with coaching searches, and especially for your team, because you'll just hear so many names. But I mean, one name that I feel like would be a very controversial hire, but I feel like could be a good hire at the same time, was Rich Rodriguez. I mean, a lot of everybody in the state of West Virginia knows Rich Rodriguez. I mean, he had unbelievable success at West Virginia University. I mean, most West Virginia fans would say that Rich Rod peak there, or that era in the mid 2000s, is the highest they've ever been at, probably. I mean, they did play for a national title in like the 80s, but that was just 1 year. So, like, I mean, I feel like that Rich Rodriguez era right there, West Virginia football, is it's just so legendary. I mean, especially even if you're a Marshall fan, you got to respect, what they did at that point in time. Now he would come with some baggage, a lot of stuff recently, kind of not real flattering stuff about him. And, his last couple stints as a head coach haven't been the greatest. I mean, his Michigan run was downright abysmal, but he only got 3 years there. And Michigan's got unrealistic expectations. Expectations are pretty unrealistic based on what they've been doing over the last decade plus. They have not been really a national contender, but they expect to be a national championship contender every year. He wasn't doing it, so he was gone. And then he did have some success at Arizona. I remember they did play in the Fiesta Bowl in 2014 or 15. So he's obviously a good coach, and he's proven that. But it would be a controversial hire just because, well, for one, he was a Mountaineer, and Marshall fans hate that. And then all the stuff going on lately, kind of some, like I said, some not real great flattering things out there about him. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like that would really divide the fan base. But I'm not saying that would be a bad hire, because he obviously knows football. But would it be the one that they need to make? I don't know about that.
Well, that's the name that I was going to throw out there as well, because he has been talked about. He has been not just talked about, but he has been it's like smoke and fire with Rich Rod in this Marshall job. So we'll see how that plays out. But look, he just signed on to be the offensive coordinator with Terry Bowden at one of those Louisiana schools. It's not, what's the other one? I'm drawing a blank on the city. What is it? It's not Louisiana Lafayette is the one they call Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
So what's the other one? Monroe. That's what it is.
Louisiana Monroe, yeah.
Louisiana Monroe. So, if your choices are to be offensive coordinator at Louisiana Monroe or head coach at Marshall, well, what are you going to choose? But I'm just saying, there's no denying that Rich Rod can coach the heck out of offense. Even at Arizona, where, you got to go up against the likes of the Arizona States and the Utahs and the Oregons and the Washingtons and the USCs of the world. I mean, it's a different animal than going up against Florida International and Florida Atlantic and Charlotte. I mean, Rich Rod made his rise at Tulane, right? That's where he came from to go to WVU to set that offense on fire. So he made his way around CUSA circles before. This is pre-AAC. This is Tulane in, I guess the Conference USA way back when. So he was at Tulane right before Marshall went undefeated in 98 or 99. He was at Tulane in 98, I believe. So, a lot of familiarity there. And I don't care what your feelings are on West Virginia University. Again, I'm not saying you hire the guy or you don't hire the guy, but that can't be just the reason you don't consider him. Right? There are other factors out there, some other stories and news headlines that are far better reasons to not consider him, but he can still coach the heck out of some offense. Arizona finished number 19 in the country a couple of years ago. So, it's interesting times. Marshall hasn't had to have a coaching search in 11 years. So this is kind of exciting. We get to talk about, we talked about how many Western coaching searches over the past 6 years, several, so we'll see how this goes. But, we talked about some good guys there. So if you had to rank a favorite in the clubhouse outside of Brad Lambert, let's just go ahead and say that we think Brad Lambert is the favorite to get the job. He's in-house already. They know what they've got. They kind of know what they want or whatever. Who do you think would, of the guys you mentioned and the guys I mentioned, who do you think would be the next favorite?
Well, I'd say probably a couple guys. I'd probably say Tony Gibson and Sean Lewis, probably. I feel like they're, safe, not safe hires, but I feel like they're safe hires in the sense that I don't think that they would do a bad job. I think they would both be good hires, especially Sean Lewis, younger guy that could really shake things up offensively. Tony Gibson's well respected in his own right. So I think both those guys will be good. Brad Lambert, like we said, we've already said all we can say about that situation. I mean, he would be a good hire. I think he would be a good hire. It's just, it wouldn't excite anybody. It wouldn't be the hire that would turn the whole fan base over on its head, or, I feel like it would just kind of, that would be the ultimate. They're just trying to keep pace of continue what they've been doing. But here's the thing, if they were trying to continue what they were doing, why wouldn't they just kept Doc? I mean, yeah. if they said that they're not renewing Doc's contract, then that must mean they don't want to continue what they're doing. So they need to change things. You can't just let it be the same. I mean, I feel like that's what that hire would be. So they need to get somebody new in there. Tony Gibson or Sean Lewis, I feel like, are both guys that have arguably they've already talked to him, and some people, that talks about that they have already talked to those two guys. I don't know. They've already interviewed for it. I don't know all the details there. So we'll see what happens. I feel like either one of those guys will be good, but I mean, of course, you just gotta. It's always risky. I mean, the big argument against getting rid of Doc was, well, what if they hire somebody and they do a crappy job? Okay, that can happen anywhere in the country, any job,
and it does, and it
does. So you can't think that, and you can't be afraid to change. You have to go in there guns ablazing, and you got to try to knock it out of the park, and that's all you can do.
So I'm glad you said that, because I was getting ready to use a baseball reference for that analogy. So when it's your time to bat, do you go up in there and just stand there saying, man, I might swing, I might strike out, I better not swing? Of course not. You go in swinging because you also might knock it out of the freaking park, right? So a couple notes about, I like your two choices too. I think maybe 1 and 2 should be Sean Lewis and Tony Gibson. Tony Gibson, a little bit more about him. He's a West Virginia guy. I'm like born West Virginia, not just, he didn't go to WVU. He went to Glenville State. So he just coached at WVU, but he was born, raised in West Virginia. So he knows it. He gets it, right? And somebody's got to kind of get it. West Virginia's a little bit different, and not in a bad way, but it's just a little bit different. And if you're from there, you get it. And Sean Lewis on the other side of things is a young guy, offensive minded. I think it would be absolutely phenomenal to give him a shot, because it could be the match that lights the bonfire to set Marshall ablaze again and, start climbing the ranks of Conference USA dominance. But, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think this week will be when things get kicked into high gear. That's what I think. So a lot of news could break really quickly, and I'm here for it, to be honest with you.
Yep.
So exciting times in Huntington. We'll see who's going to lead the herd program here pretty soon. And then we get to talk about who will or will not be retained on the coaching staff and our feelings about that. I have some coaches I'm going to put out there right now that I hope they absolutely retain. Guys like Dallas Baker, I hope stay. Kyle Segler, tight ends coach, I hope stays. Greg Atkins, I hope stays. J.C. Price, I hope stays. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Virginia Tech comes after him in a hardcore way, because he's just a star. Mm-hmm. Those guys I really, really want to see stay at Marshall, because they are a solid foundation position coach wise. There's other guys too, but I don't want to see anybody lose their job. But those guys in particular, I think they've done a phenomenal job. Phenomenal. But Trace, you got anything else to add? Let's do some final thoughts. We'll get out of here.
Well, just briefly talk about, Doc's departure a little bit. I mean, I tweeted some stuff about it, and you know what? This isn't this whole end of Doc's reign and everything. And no matter what you thought of him, like if you'd agreed with his philosophies or not, you got to respect the guy for all he did for Marshall. Period. You have to. I mean, he stayed with Marshall for 11 years. He won them a lot of games. He was consistent. They pretty much always won. They only had really 1 year where they fell off the face of the earth. They always win. He built a stable program, a good foundation. He hired a lot of great coaches that went on to bigger jobs. Brought in a lot of talent. I mean, the guy did a lot of good things for Marshall, and he was the right coach for the time when they hired him. They needed somebody to stabilize everything. They needed somebody to build a foundation to build a culture, and that's what he did. He built a culture. But the problem is after you built the culture and after you won the title in 2014, that's when things kind of just stagnated. And whenever things stagnate, that's almost worse than things completely falling off the rails, because once you stagnate, it's hard to like justify, well, how are you going to fire a guy when he's having winning records and 8 wins and playing in bowls? But when you're stagnant like that, that's when the fan base grows very apathetic. That's when the fan base gets restless. They expect more. You expect more as a team, considering literally he has said in the past that the standard for Marshall football won in 2014 was to continue to win conference titles, and he didn't do it. He did not win a single other conference title after 2014. And that's really what it comes down to. One conference title in a bad conference in 11 years that's just not going to appease the fan base. I mean, yeah, it'd be fine. It's better than losing every year, but you got to expect more. You got to get more out of it than that. He deserves our respect. He's certainly not a bad coach. He's a good coach. He's just not a great coach. He's not a championship winning coach. Well, besides one, but he's not a consistent championship coach. And like, that's the problem with Marshall. That's what they want to change. That's what they need to get something in there to shake things up. The fan base is just divided. They're not all on the same page. They need something exciting. That's what this hire has to be. It has to excite the fan base. It has to get things back into gear. I mean, every championship team Marshall's ever had, the offense has been potent. I mean, there's no coincidence there. Marshall has not had that in several years, and that's why they haven't won anything as far as conference titles. So, Doc will land on his feet somewhere, I'm sure, if he's not just retired altogether. I mean, he's a good coach. He's been around. He knows the game. But Marshall, it was time. It was just simply time. I mean, they need to move in a different direction. And I think that there's a lot of good candidates out there, and Marshall's a good job. Marshall is a solid, good job with a lot of things to look forward to and a lot of things that can go in their favor. I mean, it's not like you're trying to hire somebody at, Northeast, South Missouri State. I mean, this is a good job. I mean, it's a job with a program that has a lot of history and a tradition and an expectation and a fan base that cares, supports them. I mean, this is a good job. So there should be no shortage of great candidates, and I think that they'll hire the right guy. I hope. But I mean, respect to Doc. He did a lot of good things, but it was just time. That's what I feel.
Yeah. Look, you got to say thank you to Doc Holliday. He did what he needed to do to get the program turned. A corner was turned under Doc Holliday, without a doubt. And championship football was restored to Huntington. But I think you're right. After a while, when it starts to stagnate, then people become apathetic and they're like, well, 8 wins isn't that bad. And we still going to bowl games and, but it's just not the same as winning that title. And I think what bought him extra time was that he won the title, then the wheels fell off in 2016, and he almost immediately got the ship righted. So we're like, all right, well, let's see if we can bring it back. And they were just never able to just fully get over that championship hump. And it's finally enough was enough. I mean, it is what it is. So, but he deserves the respect of the Herd fan base. He's earned his spot in, Herd coaching lore. He's done a lot of good things. There's been a lot of calls we've questioned over the years, and we're going to do that with any coach. Because no coach is going to make every right call all the time. And even if he does make every right call all the time, we won't perceive it as the right call all the time. Yeah. That's just the fun of what we get to do. So one interesting thing that somebody pointed out to me or tossed out to me, on the heels of Doc's, the announcement of Doc Holliday, was like, hey, I could easily see him getting hired by Dan Mullen and going down to Florida again and being a recruiting coordinator or being, landing on the support staff right there. And I thought, that's really not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, he's been there before. The man brought Tim Tebow to the University of Florida, Yeah. I mean, is that out of the realm of possibility? Of course not. He could land right back down there in Gainesville and, recruit and do nothing else but recruit and collect a big paycheck and ease off into retirement whenever he feels like it. But
or Morgantown.
Just an interesting tidbit there. Or Morgantown. But just an interesting tidbit there. But anyway, almost a 2-hour-long episode, Trace. What the hell is going on today?
It's almost like there's some stuff to talk about.
Oh, my gosh. It's a season in review. We did a whole year in 2 hours. But anyway, I got to get out of here, getting ready for work, guys. We'll try to get you that Topper season finale review as soon as Steven and I can get our schedules lined out. As always, that's always the hardest thing to do. But anyway, until next time, Trace, take us out of here.
Go Herds.
Go Tops. It's the Moonshine Throwdown Podcast. Later.